Chapter 3 The Calling by L.C Pye. My throat tightened and my vision blurred. I couldn't hear anything but the pounding in my ears. No, this couldn't be happening. I wouldn't accept it. Aunt Lorraine placed her hand on her sister's back and then turned to me with fire in her eyes. They commanded us not to spread the news for the fear of people's reactions. They were stationing a guard here to ensure that chaos doesn't break out, she said, crossing her arms and releasing a sharp exhale. What's more likely is that they're here to keep us quiet, which is garbage. I refuse to be a party to another young woman being kidnapped because people are unaware of what is going on. We need to protect our own, and the King's Guard are inadequate at keeping us safe. I was only half listening to Aunt Lorraine's words because air refused to reach my lungs. I needed to get out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stay in this house any longer. Without saying a word, I ran. I ran as fast as I could, trying to escape this reality. I kept going, not thinking about where my feet were taking me. I ran until my legs burned and spots covered my vision. I collapsed at the forest floors and let the world fade away from me. The sound of voices brought me back to my consciousness, and realization hit me. I was in the forest, alone, with the daylight fading, and there were kidnappers out here somewhere. I needed to find coverage. Pushing myself off the forest floors, I crouched behind a tree, trying to see where the voices came from. About 100 feet away, 7 figures emerged. I couldn't make out their faces from the distance, but I could tell they weren't from Gasmere. They were heavily armed and seemed more than capable of taking care of anyone who got in their way. One of them had a large object placed over his shoulder. Swallowing my fear and using Aunt Lorraine's cloak as coverage, I followed them, keeping a safe distance. I stalked them while working on keeping them safe. Wait. It's definitely not right. I stalked them while working to keep calm. My breathing. Remembering the instructions Jules taught me on tracking prey. The trees around me became familiar. They were going back to where Jules had been kidnapped. The clearing. I made my way around the outside, hoping to get a better view. I wasn't sure what to do, but if these were the kidnappers, I couldn't leave to get help and risk letting them get away. I still had my bow slung around my back, so I wasn't completely helpless. But I was no fool. I knew the odds. 7-1 were not in my favor. Yet, if I followed them, they might lead me to Jules. And then, when they fall asleep, I could sneak in and save her without overthinking. I made up my mind to trail them until they stopped for the night. The figures were starting to get further away. I needed to move faster. I reached to slide my bow over my head as a precaution. When I noticed there were only 6 figures, where did the 7th one go? Scanning my surroundings, I searched for the 7th, but noise behind me ended my searching. The tightening of a bow string. I froze. It's only been 4 minutes. That was the end of chapter 3. I guess I'll go ahead and read chapter 4 as well. Chapter 4. Don't move, a gravely voice behind me said. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand. I was not ready to die. All of my thoughts faded as the overwhelming need to survive took over. I took a slow breath, trying to think of a way out, but I didn't have time to think as the others approached. Some of them were barely visible, but I was too scared to make any movements to get a better view of them. A burly man marched toward me, his dark brown beard and had hints of gray, matching his hair perfectly. He resembled a warrior and gave off the air of a leader. With his strong frame and dominating presence, as he assessed me, his gaze stayed fixed on my eyes. I waited for him to react the same way as everyone else when they saw me for the first time, with unease. Instead, his face almost showed recognition. But he quickly hardened his face again, and I returned his gaze, trying not to show my trembling lip. Raph, drop your bow. She isn't a threat. She isn't a threat. The man behind me stepped around to join the others. I watched him, unsure if the older man would resign the order. He didn't acknowledge me, but the clenched jaw and grip on his bow as he passed by me didn't go unnoticed. The fading light hid some of his features, but I could tell they were attractive in an intimidating way. Since there wasn't an arrow pointing at my back, I surveyed the area. There were 5 men and 2 women surrounding me. I took note of where each one of them stood and searched for any sign of Jules. The man carrying the large sack placed it on the ground, which revealed nobody being held inside. My first observation about them being dangerous was wrong. They were terrifying up close. Their clothing, although matched the colors of the Callings, consisted mostly of leather, which was odd. Even stranger was how they each had more than one weapon attached to their bodies. Why were you following us? Asked the older man. The forest isn't a safe place for a young woman. I tensed at his words, and I expected them to grab me right then, but I was a sitting duck. But no one attacked me. No attack ever came. They were dangerous, and now that they'd spotted me, I needed to switch plans. I needed to make sure they took me as well. You should know there's a group of our best hunters and the King's Guard on their way to the spot. You won't get away with kidnapping any more young women. I tried to sound convincing, but nothing could stop my voice from shaking. Fear radiated throughout my body. We haven't kidnapped anyone, the man called. The man called Raph spat out as he advanced toward me. The older man placed his hand across Ralph's chest. Relax, he turned back to me. We're not the kidnappers. You expect me to believe a group of strangers just happened to be in the forest at the same time as the kidnappers? She has a good point that does seem suspicious. A man with brilliant blonde hair sighed under his breath. I remained looking at him. I knew in villages up north there were others with light-colored hair like me, but I had never seen any of them in person. The older man turned his gaze to the blonde man, as if to say, "You're not helping the situation." The older man took a deep breath. We've been tracking the kidnappers. Their trail led us here. We are trying to rescue those who have been taken. Are you the king's guards? This question caused a chorus of grumbles from the whole group. They looked as intimidating as any guard I had ever seen. The leader pretended to ignore them and kept staring at me. No, we are not. There's an injustice in this kingdom, and we are heralding the call to bring an end to it. He took a moment to himself as if to bring honor to the call he talked about. I didn't know if he was telling the truth or not, but on the off chance he was, I needed to know if they knew anything to help me save Jules. What do you know about the kidnappers? I inhaled quickly. My best friend, Jules, was taken this afternoon. We were supposed to meet here to practice our shooting, but she never showed up. I went to her house and there were guards there saying she was kidnapped. A lump in my throat started to rise. I need to get her back. I can't. I won't survive. I need to get her back, I said, voice shaking. My brain couldn't comprehend what my life would become without Jules. I'm sorry to hear about your friend. We promise to do everything in our power to get her back to you, he said with real sincerity. He gave me a slight bow of his head as the others started to walk away from me. I stood there watching them leave the clearing, not sure what to do. I wasn't the courageous one. That was Jules. But I couldn't stay here in Gasmere and do nothing. Since the first day we met, Jules had protected me, and she had never stopped. Now it's my turn to do the same for her. I would do whatever it took to get her back. Let me come with you, I yelled while running after them. The words left my mouth before I could register them. The leader hesitated for a moment, which gave me enough courage to continue. I reached out and grabbed onto his sleeve. Please, I can't stay here knowing Jules is out there somewhere. He peered over his shoulder, eyeing my hand, clutching his shirt. All of them had stopped to stare at my outstretched hand. Raph laughed as I slowly withdrew my hand. He stared at me with contempt, but I focused on their leader, silently pleading with him to let me come with them. Miss, I can't be responsible for you, he said, no hint of changing his mind. You don't understand. I have to find her. I was not proud to beg. You won't have to worry about me. I can take care of myself. Let her come with us, the striking blonde said with a shrug of his shoulders. I have a feeling she'll make a great addition to our group. He gave me a wink, which made my breath hitch. I didn't usually receive attention like that from men. She'll be dead weight, Raph glared at me. Ignoring Raph's glare, I stared straight at their leader. I won't be dead weight, and I have skills I can offer the group. I didn't have any real skills, but I knew I would have to make something up along so they were gonna let me come along. I'm good with the bow, I lied, and I know my way around a forest. If the forest is the one around Gasmere, the leader studied me for a while, not giving away any emotion. Then he showed the same hint of recognition as before. I quickly interrupted before he could answer. If you don't let me come with you, I'll go off on my own to find her. Either way, I'm not staying here. He raised his hands to silence me. I can't promise your safety if you go with us. You have to know it'll be dangerous, and it could be life or death. I knew his words were a warning for what might lie ahead, but I couldn't process them because he was saying yes. We could use someone who knows their way around these forests. We will be staying the night, but at first light, we will be moving on. If you arrive back here by dawn, I won't stop you from joining us. I walked through the farmer's quarter towards my house in disbelief. Yesterday, Jules and I were hiding behind these houses, and now who knows where she was. The thought of joining those strangers caused my body to shake in trepidation, especially because they believed that I knew my way around the forests, but I had never left Gasmere. I stopped and gazed back toward the trees. This was the only forest I knew. Thanks to King Madden's law, we weren't allowed to leave our village until after our calling. The elder reminded us each year that it was designed to keep everyone safe. So leaving my home wasn't the smartest decision, but this was Jules, and her life was in danger. She was the only one, other than my parents, who accepted me. I would do anything for her. There was nothing for me in Gasmere without her. If I stayed and chose to become a hunter, there was no way they would accept me without her. I needed to go find her, and my best chance at doing that would be to join those 7 strangers. Reaching the door to my home, I froze. How was I going to tell my mother and father? They wouldn't agree to let me leave. I pressed my forehead to the door and realized what I had to do. I would have to run away. Steeling myself, I opened the door. My facade crumbled the moment my parents rose from the table, bringing me into their arms. The tears I had been holding back all evening flowed freely, and I collapsed into their arms, letting them carry all my weight. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to grieve for Jules, but also for my parents. My resolve to save Jules started to shake. How could I leave knowing that I may never see my parents again? That I would cause them so much pain and worry. Mother whispered in my ear that Aunt Lorraine had come by to tell them the news and to make sure I was okay. My heart warmed a little. Aunt Lorraine was one of the few that supported our friendship. We spent countless days at her house listening to her stories and eating her delicious baked goods. They will find her, Talia. It will be okay. Mother's words were meant to console me, but they did a little. She didn't know there was a storm ripping me apart on the inside. However, she was right about one thing. Jules would be found, but it wouldn't be by the king's guards. They helped me get into my bed. They didn't say a word, letting their presence be the comfort I needed. Mother held me in her arms until my sobs subsided. A couple of hours later, they left my room believing I had cried myself to sleep. My eyes were heavy and aching from the crying, but sleep still evaded me. My mind raced between the 2 decisions in front of me. Leave the safety of Gasmere and go into the unknown with 7 strangers to save Jules, or stay with my parents and go through my calling ceremony trusting that the king's guards or the 7 strangers would find her and bring her back. If I stayed in Gasmere, I would be safe, but I wouldn't be able to find a place to belong without Jules. I couldn't choose the hunters without her. Neither the farmers nor the healers would ever accept me. I reached up to grab my necklace as I lay staring out my window at the night sky. My throat tightened, and the thought of Jules being out there by herself She was strong, but who knew what these kidnappers were capable of? She always put my safety before her own, never thinking twice about the consequences. This was my chance to do the same thing for her, even if that meant I would become a fugitive by not showing up to my calling ceremony. Dawn was still hours away, but since I was unable to fall asleep, I decided to go to the clearing early. I tiptoed to my dresser and pulled out a long-sleeved tunic. At first, I grabbed one of the countless brown ones that I had, then remembered they had already seen me in a green cloak. They would have assumed I was a hunter. My hand hovered over the green, bundled off clothes. It had never been an early. It had been an early. Welcome to the Hunters, present from Jules. Something inside me called for me to grab it. I did. I knew implications of this decision. I'd be declaring myself a hunter. That meant hiding my skills as a healer and farmer and concealing my right forearm at all costs. I couldn't draw attention to myself. I needed to stay under the radar and act as if I had chosen the hunters as my calling. I was about to break the law, and them continuing to believe I was a hunter would lead to less questioning. I grabbed an empty knapsack and placed a water canteen, some leftover bread, and dried meat in it before walking out of my room. I grabbed the wildflowers sitting on my vanity. Once downstairs, I placed them on the kitchen table as a sign to my parents that I had left on my own accord. Any more would crumble my resolve. Snatching my bow and quivering from the wall by the door, I silently said goodbye before opening the front door and leaving the only home I had ever known. Wrapping my arms around my wrists, my feet hit the dirt path with a muffled thud. The village was still quiet. Every door and window had been sealed shut, and all the lights extinguished. The little light from the advancing sun marked the start of the day of my calling ceremony, the one I wouldn't be at. I peered down at my covered forearm. I needed to keep my empty crest hidden at all cost. If I were caught, I would be taken by the king's guards and face the consequences of my defiance, something I would do anything to avoid. King Madden was not known to be merciful. I reached the clearing before dawn, so I decided to practice with my bow while I waited. I aimed at a large knob on a tree, but I hadn't hit it. I inhaled the stillness of the forest, allowing myself to exhale all the worry and fear inside me. The leaves danced in the trees, and the flycatchers were chattering among themselves. My fingers touched my cheeks as I pulled back my bowstring, finding my anchor points. I released the arrow with my breath, and wind skimmed my face before a second arrow thudded dead center in the target. And that was chapter 4 of The Calling by L.C. PYE.